and welcome to Ungimmicked. Another week, another episode with the whole crew present. We have Alex Moreau, Connor McDonald, Matthew O'Neill, Sanjeev Vinod. My name is Gonzalo Souza, and let's get the ball rolling. Today we are going to be talking about another subcategory of magic, or is it a subcategory of magic? That will be the topic we'll be discussing. Is mentalism magic? Connor McDonald, tell us a little bit about this.
Gonzalo, you asked it perfectly. Is mentalism magic? For many years, mentalism has always gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to its home in the magic community. Many magicians and mentalists believe that mentalism should not be considered magic, and it should have its own separate category. So today we're going to break up our discussion into two parts. The first half is going to be addressing the arguments. So we're strictly just going to talk about why it could be magic, why it could not be magic, and what are the arguments for both sides. And then in the second half, we are going to get to debate, is mentalism magic? Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
Perfect. So let's address the arguments. To make it simple, let's just start with 4. Why could mentalism be considered magic?
Then you got to go for like defining magic.
Please no, please not again.
Well, okay, so let's establish now that magic is an extremely broad term.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
it is.
It's for some people it could be magic. So let's just, for the sake of the conversation, not go there.
Okay, well, let me start then. I believe if we were proposing the arguments for, I would argue that it lends itself to most definitions we've ever heard of magic. It is something that it can be considered extremely unlikely or impossible in many cases that it's performed in a presentational style. So I believe it fits so many definitions that we've heard of magic over the years that, I mean, it fits the definition.
Yeah, I think Alex hit it. I mean, one specific one I've heard that I think especially applies here is magic as interactive theater. And I mean, mentalism, like that's what it is, right? It's very interactive, often, I think often even more so than a lot of the magic we see. And especially, I do think that there's a huge component of theater involved to really present it well. So yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't be a part of magic.
Yeah, one that I like to think of is that they both use magician-esque techniques in theory to obtain the same impossible and magical effect, right? Mm-hmm. I think Alex was touching on that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd even agree that. I'd even say that there's so many things that we don't even know as an effect or as a phenomenon or as a performance if it is mentalism or magic. So from there, going, is mentalism magic? There's such a large gray zone where, for instance, let's say you think of a card, or like you pick a card and I guess which card you have.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're very quickly into a very gray zone where, well, you know, it looks like mentalism to me, but is it mentalism though? So it says we're very quickly this very gray zone. So that's why it's so hard, because so many things that we do sort of land in an, I don't like saying in between because I'm going to express something later that I don't think where there is really an in between, but it falls in the zone where it's really hard to say, okay, now if I were to oppose them, where would I put where? What would I put where? I'm sorry.
I think we're on a similar page where I wouldn't call it an in between, because I don't think magic's on one side, mentalism on another, and there is a middle. I think they overlap a lot, and that overlap is really that gray zone. Like I think I've seen Teller lecture on this a few times, where if it's as simple as a coin vanishing in your hand, there's literally tens of hundreds of different stories that you can attach to that exact same moment. And that's why, like Alex said, I think the same thing can be framed as if it was numerous sort of things, one of them being mentalism. And I also think in a very, very oversimplified dichotomy, magic would boil down to method and effect. And mentalism shares both of that. It often uses methods, and it often wants to accomplish a very similar effect. So if it only had one or the other, then I would say maybe we could argue that it's far enough away. But I think that overlap is really, really heavy to the point where they become subsets, or synonymous? Not synonymous, but definitely one as a subset of another.
I want to talk about two things. One of them is right off of that. I'm struggling to find or to think of something that I would consider mentalism that I would not consider magic.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining a Venn diagram, right? There's magic, there's mentalism, and we recognize the overlap because it's evident. I don't see what's outside of magic that's only mentalism, but that might be because I don't know enough about the arts. And then I also look at it in another way. You see magic with cards, and we say card tricks, right? You see magic with coins. Those are coin tricks. Magic with the mind, we just don't call it mind tricks. I think we call it mentalism. It's just we use a more a prettier term than just sticking tricks at the end of whatever thing we're doing.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely. When you back on exactly what Alex and Sanjeev were saying with the massive amount of overlap, also you have sort of one layer deeper where a lot of magic tricks, when standard magic tricks that a mentalist would call magic, not mentalism, has incorporated mentalism techniques, and a lot of mentalism has incorporated magic techniques. So can a mentalist look at magic and say this is not mentalism even though it has the mentalism? Where do you draw the line? It's hard.
It is a very hard line to draw, and I think the reason why the line is so hard to draw is also because mentalism is, let's be real, have you ever heard a layman spontaneously say mentalism
Nope.
as opposed to mind reading?
Nope.
Good point.
So to try it, because the problem is mentalism, we only have a very intuitive understanding of what that word means. And because it's very intuitive, it's of course very personal to everyone, and context and definitions, and we could talk about this forever. But just as to quickly see how the general lay person sees mentalism, I just typed mentalism definition into Google, and I'm just going to share two that, for me, grab the essence of what people think mentalism is. So the first one I have: the theory that physical and psychological phenomena are ultimately explicable only in terms of a creative and interpretative mind. Which,
Weird.
doesn't mean much.
Yeah.
it's just
Okay.
I don't think that means
very-
much. Let me take the other one, just from Wikipedia. Mentalism is a performing art in which its practitioners, known as mentalists, appear to demonstrate highly developed mental or intuitive abilities. And then it goes on saying that performances may appear to include hypnosis, telepathy, clairvoyance, divination, etc. So to me, that definition clearly says they appear to demonstrate something. So there is, for me now, clearly, it's sort of like you're gathering to see someone do something, which, sounds a lot like magic to me.
I think then from what we've said so far, especially the point Gonzalo mentioned about how I can't think of any mentalism that's not magic, but I can definitely think of a lot of magic that is not mentalism. So I think we're basically
Absolutely.
positing a subset
Yeah.
structure here, where like magic is a larger circle and mentalism is within it, just like maybe coin tricks, card tricks, other branches. Are we all in agreement on that?
I'd say so.
Until another argument comes up. Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Connor, take it away.
Well, I was gonna say, let's maybe, if we can, let's go on to the other argument, right?
Right before
Why
we move on,
isn't-
Connor,
Oh yeah.
really just quick question, just to go off the tail end of that, is do you think the argument for making a distinction between mentalism and magic comes from the mentalists trying to portray their act as literal, real mind reading?
Precisely. So,
Yo, I'm a mentalist. I predicted
thanks,
it.
Matthew.
I'm sorry.
That was not a question. That was just straight up a point.
Oh, I had no idea.
No, but
I'm sorry.
it was good. Let's move on from that and save it for later. Why wouldn't mentalism be considered magic? Like, let's address the other side of the argument, because I feel like we've done a good job with addressing why it might be considered magic, but why couldn't it be considered magic?
Well, here I might be repeating a little bit of what Matt said, but from a mentalist perspective, to make sure that they distance themselves from, sponge bunnies.
Rip.
Just making sure that they're taking they're seeing the different light, which I mean, I want to get as far as possible, and I'm not a mentalist.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So-
it's like a magician is there to do, or a magician is there and could be considered that he's doing theatrical trickery, right? Or like illusions, or and maybe pseudoscience, but that could also be whatever the mentalism presentation you have. But a mentalist is there to claim that they're actually reading your mind, or they're actually doing exactly what they're saying.
I would.
And I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but the gist of it is that they're going to say they're claiming.
I would hesitate to use that as the primary distinction, mainly because I think that, again, we're not arguing on quality here, but I think I've definitely seen a good deal of magic that's presented as if I actually have these magic powers. I'm actually doing this. And I think maybe a better reasoning behind that split is, like Alex mentioned, the connotation, where, again, I cannot speak for the public perception as it is now, but I think historically we have seen a drift towards viewing magic as often trivial, as often meant for kids, as often just a plaything. And I can see why, to a mentalist, or those we put into that category, I can see why a way more serious atmosphere is befitting what they're doing, at least theatrically. And so that could be definitely a possible reason for why they want to distance that connotation, because it helps take away some of the audience's preconceptions coming in, so that it's easier to create that atmosphere of both intimacy and seriousness that I think lends itself to more powerful mentalism.
Oh, that's really interesting. I really like that a lot, of being able to try to differentiate yourself to get rid of the preconceived notions and to get rid of the associations with other sort of not as quality sorts of performances. And now I'm just wondering, I'm thinking out loud here, which camp tries to distance the gap the most? Mentalist? Okay, yeah, we're all in agreement. Mentalists. Why though? Why is it that magicians might think, oh no, it's the same. It's part of. Yeah, exactly, right, Alex. Versus a mentalist would be like, no, mine, it's completely different. They might use magic techniques too, but no, it's different.
Yeah, and in fact, I really like the point Sanjeev brought up. I think a lot of it is due to history more than anything. It's because I think mentalism definitely stems, or at least has its roots deeply implanted in something that was, in the past, trying to be real, and it was a a way bigger business and everything. So I think the fact that a lot of mentalism effects that today are presented as something that a lot more candid do have their roots in things that were, scams and, false psychology and that sort of thing. So on the historical part, I think there was a very clear distinction where spiritualists and hypnotists, I mean, hypnotism is something else, I think. Not that I'm qualified to talk about it. But spiritualism and all that stuff, it was very, it was as a very big, very large, like there was a very, you're going to have to cut some of this out, I'm sorry, I'm losing my words, but sort of this ethical gray zone that people really try to make the most out of.
It was almost like conjuring. Like it was like a witchcraft almost.
Yeah, absolutely, like witchcraft. I mean, yeah, probably. But now let me go on the other point. I'm gonna use the same argument I used for the for the against. Is the very fact that the word mentalism is something unknown to people might be the reason that they use it. Because now, as a layperson, when you hear someone go on stage and say, "I'm mentalist," you have to make up your mind to what that person is. So you might tell yourself a story that they don't feel comfortable telling out loud.
Oh, so it turns it implicit, so that they don't have to say things like, I am going to read your minds, and so
exactly.
on.
That's
implicit. Oh, that's interesting.
Unfortunately, a lot of mentalists will do that, and then exactly proceed to do what Sanjeev was saying, which is, I am going to read your mind.
No, but I think it's important. We've done it at in this podcast in other contexts as well. Mentioned the subdivisions of magic, and how different how those subdivisions are becoming more defined, and all of those try to run away from the stereotypes of, and I know I'm boiling this down, and it's a great trick, but it's sponge bunnies. It works very well for the argument that we're making. Mentalism does a good job at that and has an easier path because of what you're saying, Alex. The word is different, the word is unknown. And it's the fact that they don't necessarily use common props like cards or coins. That transition's easy, which is not to say that I don't try to do the exact same. Or when I present myself as a magician, and somebody says, "Oh, so you do the sponges? Is it like the little sponge balls?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't." Which isn't to say that sponge balls is not a good trick or that it's not a good thing. It's just we still fail to dissociate the different aspects of magic.
I would just jump in quickly and say that I don't think that's a problem exclusive to magic, right? Even in dance, there's so many dance styles that are often confused for one another. Even in piano, in as simple a binary as classical and jazz, which is obviously not a binary. There's also a lot of stuff outside that, a lot of stuff within that. I think there's a lot of those same misconceptions, and I would go as far as to say that the only way to kind of move forward from those, the only way to not necessarily fix, maybe amend, maybe modify those perceptions is just straight honesty. If someone says, "Oh, so you're a magician? Oh, you do card tricks then?" And if you're not someone who does card tricks, say, "No, I don't. That's something that some magicians do. And they do really well, but that's just not for me." Or, "Oh, so do you read minds?" "No, that's not something I do. I only work with cards." Things like that. And yeah, I think that honesty is something that'll help move all of us forward and help move the public perception of magic to maybe look at things in a more nuanced take and help address the things that we're talking about between mentalism and magic too.
But that parallel that you're drawing to music, I still think that it's easier to make those distinctions in other arts than it is in magic, because magic is the art of the occult, and because it has that hidden part and the fact that we need to keep the secrets
We
secret.
deal with secrets.
Yeah.
And music is so well known, dude. Everyone's gonna listen to music in their life.
music is-
Not everyone's gonna watch magic. Yeah.
I think music is the art that reaches more people. So
Good point.
Completely pulled the statement out of my ass, but
But there is, because we're talking about mentalists trying to differentiate themselves from magicians, but now like we're in a world where mentalists are trying to differentiate themselves from other mentalists. Like to the point where we have now even like verbs to denominate them, and we have what's called propless mentalism, which is a term that did not exist, or I mean it did exist, but it was nowhere near as popular as today. I was about to say 10 years ago, but even 3 years ago, you didn't hear propless mentalism much at all. But now you have people going, "Oh shit, well, mentalists are basically doing sponge bunnies, but with mentalism." So I also want to be different from these guys as well as the guys doing sponge bunnies. So how can I mark that again and say, "Oh, it's propless"? No, I don't write down anything, blah blah blah. So for me, the intention is very clear. I don't know about the way they're doing it. I don't know if I'm completely for it. I think it's a very effective way, but I think for me there's quite a clear intention to differentiate yourself.
Yeah. On that note, Alex, I think I would argue that beyond a certain point, that categorization is just futile, because I think that intention again is of differentiating yourself. But I would say that if you're not different enough, that's just a malintentioned, not really effective method. I would say a better method is, sure, go under the label of whatever people are most likely understand you as, and then differentiate yourself with how you perform. Differentiate yourself with the quality.
I think we're going to touch a lot of that on the second part, but I would agree. I don't think it's an effective way.
Yeah. Connor, I know we're near the end of this half, so what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is. I was going to bring something up, and it might spark into a bigger conversation, so I'm just going to bring it up anyway, and we'll kind of see how it goes, because the other half, we can transfer this over to the other half. So there was a study done. It was published by Magic Convention, and I believe it was Joshua J. who did the study. And in the study, they basically just asked different people what they would rather see. Would they rather see, card tricks, maybe a coin disappear, or like would they rather have their mind read? And 50% of the people said that they would rather have someone read their mind. And what that kind of says is that magic only covers so much, and lay people find mind reading more interesting, and so to lay people, it's easier to just say we are our own separate thing, and it's more interesting, so they attract a bigger yet more specific crowd of people. I just want to know what your opinion on that study is. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, well, sorry. Interesting, or more descriptively impossible when you say card trick, coin trick, mind reading. Everyone knows you can't know what I'm thinking. But card tricks have a method, obviously. So,
gentlemen, this is going to be the big point of discussion of the second half. In the meantime, I do have to call us for the break, where I tell all of you beautiful listeners to come chat with us on social media. You can meet us at facebook.com/ungimmicked or on Instagram @ungimmicked. We've been interacting with you more and more. It's great to see your engagement. Please keep
What are
talking
these
to you.
words? Interacting, engagement.
They're the fancy words that I read that Reddit told me that I should say.
I love Reddit.
So these are the fancy words that I need to put in to make us look more professional or something like that.
Nice.
We're so professional.
People that are listening, come chat with us. We are doing this and we love it. So we would love to hear what you have to say about it. You can check us out on any of your podcasting platforms, whether it would be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, all of those. Also, we're on youtube.com/ungimmicked. And gentlemen, my social media plugs aside, we have a breather crimp to talk about this week, presented by Matthew O'Neill.
Yeah, we do. We definitely do have a breather crimp, and what a freaking recommendation this is, because you know I love him. Darren Brown. My favorite mentalist. Your favorite mentalist, hopefully, if you have good taste. Honestly, it's unbelievable. And his book, if you can find a copy, I know it's expensive, but look for a copy. Absolute Magic. Wow. Changes your view on magic and what mentalism is. It shows you how to essentially properly introduce mentalism in a very interesting way and to make it genuinely engage with people. Also completely applicable to magic and just making your stories more immersive. So I couldn't recommend it more. Darren Brown is the best ever. Oh my goodness. That's my recommendation.
Thank you, Matthew. Darren Brown, of course, one of the best ever in any aspect of magic, mentalism or not. So a lot of love for Darren Brown. From the Ungimmicked crew, we know that Matthew has a special thing for Darren Brown.
He's the best.
So once again, we're leaving our high praises to our favorite British magician.
Mentalist, not magician.
Oh, mentalist.
Mentalist. Ooh.
Boys, we can go on to the second half of the podcast. We left off in the first half talking about a study that was made by Joshua J. That asked people if they would rather see a card trick, a coin trick, or if they would rather have their mind read. I see all the boys very excited to jump into this conversation. Alex, take it away.
Yeah, well, I was just saying here specifically, from what I understand, it was published at a convention, so it was definitely directed towards magicians. And I have to say, in terms of magicians, card tricks are, princess card tricks, screw this, or pick a card, I find it. To magicians, I feel like a coin disappearing just means shuttle pass, because people are that... And I'm sorry for talking about this, but I mean, I think this is well known enough that you can find it so largely on YouTube, so I don't mind talking about it. That even to magicians don't know anything about coin magic. Like, it's frightening. And so, all of those three questions, it's a very biased question in my mind. Like, would you rather see a poor card trick, a coin poorly disappearing, or somebody reading your mind? Well, everyone in their right mind is going to say, yeah, show me someone reading my mind. So, first of all, I have to say that question is I think carries a little bit with it. And also, for me, carries the way that even magicians, we don't really know what's in mentalism. Because we put so many effects we know under the cover of mentalism, so many more than like coin magic, for instance, that it's naturally more attractive to say, okay, I want to see more because I'm not sure I know everything about mentalism.
There you go. Anyone else want to comment on this?
Well, I think Alex really leveled it very well. The question is poorly posed. So it gets the answer that it wants, I think.
I wouldn't say the question is poorly posed. I'd say the wording is just inevitably biased and carries connotations.
Yeah. Well, then I poorly worded my statement because that's exactly what I wanted to convey.
Fair.
Well, then let's move on to the second half. And this is where we get to really put both sides of that argument to the test and see how strong they are. Is mentalism magic?
Oh boy, I want to go. I've been holding on for like 25 minutes.
He's been waiting.
Because obviously, we want to follow a certain structure, so I don't want it to get really everything down in the first one we were trying to take. But for me, and for so many people, and I don't want to name names, but a lot of very influential figures in magic, and I'm sure you all know one, agree on the fact that it doesn't matter.
Oh my god.
It doesn't matter. or nowhere near as much as people think. I think that is essentially the reason why people have sort of abandoned the discussion, is because it is a nonsensical debate to have, because it's not going to change anything for you, and especially for the people watching.
Mm-hmm. In the context of our of our episode here, I'm not going to, don't change the topic, but the real question really is your show good? That's the, like that's,
are nice. You doing good
nice.
Like, are you doing good magic, or are you doing good mentalism? Is it good? That's what matters. Like, nice. People are focusing too much on the categories, but they sort of forget, oh yeah, guys, I'm a mentalist, look at me, and then their show is bad.
Yeah, I mean, like, that totally went a different direction than I thought. But what Alex, you bring up a good point. It's really just, you debate. They're like, people are angry just to be angry. People are like debating that just to be upset about something. Like, does it really matter? I don't think it does.
No, it doesn't matter what category you fall under in the end, because we talk about the jerks so many times. I think we mention him at least once an episode. What he does is magic, is mentalism, is storytelling, is world-shifting, perception bending. It's everything put into one. So it's when you go beyond those categories, I think you end up becoming more versatile in what you can do.
That's an interesting take, actually. And I would say that even the public, I'm sure, understands that just categorization inherently has limitations, right? I mean, as simple as like Derek Doug Audio's show, right? Calling it a magic show, I think, gives you certain expectations going in, but a lot of the general comments a lot of the general feedback you had from people coming out of the show, like Stephen Colbert, was like, that wasn't really like a magic show, that was more. And see, what an empty sentence, right? That doesn't mean anything unless you've been part of that experience. And so I would side with Alex in that this discussion might make us feel better internally, which is, first of all, a horrible source of validation. But second of all, the public simply is too ignorant. Makes it sound like it's their fault. The public is unaware, and it's not their fault.
Naive? Is that a better word?
Naive also makes it sound like their fault,
yeah,
you know?
It's
right. Not their fault. It's just our fault.
They just don't know.
It isn't. No, it isn't.
They just don't know.
There's no reason for them to care, and so they don't. Yes.
And I would even say that this debate has not been only two-sided, and I believe it is Max Maven that brought it to the discussion. It might have existed before, but Max Maven was just a big proponent for it, to talk about, as opposed to magic, mentalism, as opposed to those two, talking about mental magic.
Oh, geez.
Saying, essentially, you can also consider it as another subcategory, which has its own, like, implied borders, or we can just, talk about this forever. But inherently, what I think that means, essentially going back to what we said at the beginning, card magic is card tricks, coin magic is coin tricks, and here I think Max Maven was looking to sort of run away from this, and mentalism is all the rest, going saying, okay, now tricks that have as a central component the mind of either the spectators or the audience is essentially this new category we're doing. So all I'm trying to say here is it's not bipolar. Lots of many people have proposed their own limits and limitations and new terms and everything. So obviously we're not going to talk about them because, once again, I think we've really touched the fact that it's sort of nonsensical to talk about it, especially to people that aren't necessarily magicians on this podcast. But everyone has their own way of interpreting it, and I think that's what's important in the end, is you knowing, going, okay, this is the sort of thing where I'm comfortable, and I like this general idea of this sort of like mental approach to magic, so let me do mental magic. And I don't mind people giving their opinions at all, but I think the most important thing is for you to forge an opinion of yourself and just know where you're going from that and know how much you care, I think, most importantly.
Yeah, definitely. I think most people eventually get there. If they become like experienced performers, they sort of figure out their own style. Just a quick comment on the whole debate is that a big part of it is that it's fun. You pick a side, just start swinging away.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I'll give it to you.
Mentalism is not magic. Here's 50 reasons why.
And by the way, this is, I believe this is one of the reasons why it's springing up like in recent times, because internet, man.
Yeah.
Internet, man.
People
Everyone
love
has,
arguing on the internet, yeah.
Yeah, because everyone can like hide behind a pseudonym and just swing in very inappropriate ways to each other. And this conversation was, I think, significantly less out there before the internet were made it right. It's not that I would know, but I'm strongly suspecting.
Yeah, I would even go as far as to say that even more now, when we're all kind of bored and shuttered at home. You see a lot of debates. I've seen debates springing up on the not even the authenticity, on the credibility of Zoom magic or respect for it, and the sudden 180 people have taken on social media magic and so on. So I think it's just a product of our times, of people being angry because I fear in some cases they have nothing better to do. But I do think that this discussion still brought up some interesting points for me. This general trend of, maybe it's in all arts, but especially within magic, which is what we're all most authorized to comment on, you see people trying to distance themselves from other things because the other may not fall into the perception we want, or it might just not be the same thing at all. So if we completely ignore this discussion, we're not solving that problem, right? So what are you guys' thoughts on that trend of distancing and how to actually go about solving it?
I don't know. That's tough. That really is tough, because I was about to take it a different place. Sorry, I kind of got put on the spot there. But what could sort of tie it in is that, do you think we forgot performing?
What do you mean?
Like, we've been sort of locked up for the past couple months. Do you think we need to because we need to make these distinctions, we need to make these categorizations, as you mentioned before, because we're bored and because we don't remember
I think the arguments go started before. I think the arguments.
It's been around for a while.
I think it's also a societal shift, because I think we've been, as a society, we've become very focused on the individuality of everybody, and you being able to choose who you are and what represents you exactly, and people are coming up with newer and newer categories and newer groups and subsets to find their own very niche communities. And that happens in the society at large. I think it then happens in magic, where people are like, well, I don't do exactly that. I get a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Let me
We
create
like
a new.
labels.
Yeah, we do. So let me create a new label, which maybe is just for me and my friends, but it makes us feel exclusive, makes us feel different. That would be for a
Our style of magic is ungimmicked.
Well, we both like and hate labels, right? Like we like giving ourselves new ones, but even more than that, we hate existing labels. And I think there's some thrill from that too, which might be driving this.
Yeah, I mean, what it sounds like, and I think we might have talked about this earlier, besides maybe the small little just communities that people are trying to make, it does just kind of seem like a way of marketing yourself. It's an easier way to market yourself, because how often do you hear of a mentalist besides a magician? You know what I mean? And those are intrinsically more interesting. A mentalist, like we said with the whole would you rather read your mind? Mm-hmm. So it could come down to that, just a way of differentiating yourself from your competition.
Yeah, that's true. And you go from the point of view from people that book performers, they're not going to go, I'm looking for a mental magician. They're going to, we need a magician for our event. Let's get a magician. So, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, people are going to book you when they're looking for a magician. It doesn't matter if you consider yourself to be a mentalist or whatever else. And I think that I really like this idea of like, hey, let's create this very like special thing where only me and my friends, we have a little bit of this, a little bit of this. But in the end, I hope there's more to who you are than, no, I'm the mental magician that does coins. And, it's a thing that's stupid. I think most than anything, you're you. You are Gonzalo Souza, Matthew O'Neill. And if all you have to say is, I'm this, so, well, yeah, no shit. You have your unique way of approaching a bunch of stuff like every other human being on the planet. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
So I don't like this idea of really going deeper and deeper into these things. That said, I really like the intrinsic interest, and mostly on people's websites, because that's mostly the interface people are going to be looking to when they're booking someone. And so if you're on your website, you have just magician up there as opposed to maybe, performer or mentalism, whatever you want to put, there is an appeal to that. But now it becomes like more, marketing. Like what is the first word you want to string to people's minds. But I think more than that, once they give you a call and you get to say, hey, this is the sort of thing I do stage shows, I do this, and suddenly that doesn't really matter. So I think it's mostly for first impressions. as long as lay people and bookers aren't.
There's some really good points you brought up. I think the first of which is that it doesn't matter what we call ourselves, especially if you're in an industry where you're trying to get booked. You know, it only matters what the people booking you think of you as. And that becomes something that often becomes a more important consideration than what tiny label you put yourself into. And second, yeah, you're different. That's kind of your job, to be different. And rather than trying to make that explicit with even creating your new label, that's really overkill. Instead, just convey that implicitly through your performance by how different you are, rather than trying to continue adding branches to a definition so that it perfectly describes you. Because a definition is never going to perfectly describe you. If it does, you're probably not interesting enough, or you're probably not communicating your honest self enough, because we're all complicated people. And to me, at that point, it's not even worth trying to communicate explicitly with labels. At that point, just communicate it through who you are during your performance. And I think that's the most accurate and probably the most honest way to go about it too.
Definitely, it's really important to be authentic when you're performing, or even, like Alex said, when you're marketing yourself. For example, like, you know, this is like a little bit of a piece of advice that I sort of fell into a trap when I was really first marketing myself, is make your titles reasonable. Like your categories that you want to put yourself in. You can say mentalist, say mental magician. Don't be like, I'm a conjurist, I'm an illusioneer.
Oh, dude,
I'm
deception
I'm
engineer. Yeah. God.
Deception engineer. Like,
artist of
that sounds
attention.
like a poorly written Instagram bio.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh man.
You know, like, exactly. Does every like agent and like personality on their website just put in big, I'm a world traveler or something? Like, no,
Yeah.
F you.
Like
Yeah.
world-renowned magician, yeah.
See, and again, there's obviously situations where it's justified, right? Like, for example, most recently we've seen the movement of cardistry. That got its own name, and to me, at least personally, I think that's very justified, because cardistry is at least dramatically different from everything that I approach in Magic. Like we mentioned earlier, right? There's method and effect, and maybe methods are similar, where we're handling the cards in similar ways, but the intended effect is dramatically different. And so I would categorize it as something different. But I just think in so many of these situations, I think that's what we've been returning to through this discussion. We just take it too far when it really doesn't matter, and when we should be focusing on other things that matter more.
I would completely agree with what you said, is that I think the discussion has nothing to do, like comparing mentalism to magic has nothing to do with comparing magic to cardistry. Mm-hmm. And you hit the nail right in the head. The intent. That's all I had to say. Yeah. I could expand, but I think it's a
I think it's a great place to close our conversation. I'm gonna hand it to Connor McDonald for final remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've gotten this far, you shouldn't have, because this entire discussion was pointless. But I mean, hey, I mean, right? No, okay. I can't even this really was a pointless discussion. No, if you made it this far, it brought up some interesting points. Maybe it expanded your brain a little bit. Maybe it got you thinking a little bit differently. Hey, you know what? No, this wasn't pointless, because it helps us realize that stuff doesn't matter. Don't be upset for no reason. It doesn't matter. Just live your life. Have fun.
Do your
be
thing.
yourself.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Okay, there we go. It wasn't pointless.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are nearing the end of our podcast. But before we end, we of course have our assembly. This week, Alex Moreau will present that.
Yes, absolutely. Now, we were talking about mentalism, and a lot of mentalism has inherently this sort of like social science. A lot of mentalists learn to really pick up cues on people, being able to affect people's emotions very directly, and not only on stage. Now, suddenly being able to convey your happiness or maybe your distress a lot easier, reading off and knowing when people are uncomfortable or not. I think mentalists do it significantly better than the average person and even performer. And I would encourage everyone here to learn some basic social science. And I'm going to be very careful here, because a lot of it is complete bullshit and pseudoscience.
Yes, sir.
So be careful with that, but just learn to be aware. I could be here recommending you books and everything, but the thing is, books, you know, there's like context, the author isn't completely acknowledged everything. So I would just suggest that once in a while, think to yourself, oh, think actively of everything. And just notice where people look, who people look at, the tone in people's voices, and you can get extremely good. But I'm saying this not to make yourself more interesting, but just to make yourself probably a better person in social situations. Now, suddenly you're able to identify when it's time to do things and when it's time not to, how to help people out and everything. So yeah, unfortunately, once again, I'm not qualified to talk about where to read and resources, but I would just say once in a while, try to actively be aware of what's happening. And you'll be very surprised at how easy it is.
Real quick thing to add on to that. This is just something I teach, so I'm very passionate about it. And the only point I want to add is let's make intent very clear. And I know Alex is very clear on this. I just want to communicate that to our viewers too, where your intent is not to get people to like you. Your intent is not to suddenly be the alpha male in the room. Your intent is not to hack someone's psychology. And I say all these things because this is typically the clickbait that is used to market these techniques and strategies, even marketing them as techniques and strategies. But I think the intent is really just becoming a better person by listening to the people around you, because we can all, I think, benefit from a little sensitivity and empathy. And that's really the mindset we should be approaching it from.
Thanks very much for clarifying. I hope now people are very aware. Yeah, thank you so much.
Somehow this became a very wholesome episode, and we end on a very, very positive note. I was very happy about this discussion. Thank you all for joining me here today. We were all joined by Alex Moreau, Connor McDonald, Matthew O'Neill, Sanjeev Vinod. My name is Gonçalo Souza. Thank you for listening. This was Ungimmicked.